Once again, I find myself returning to this book, the one I took from the hands of a dying priest so long ago. It's not just a collection of stories, it's a guidebook, a tactical manual for life. For me, this particular passage in Matthew 9:9-13 always cuts deeper than the rest. Why? Because it flips the table on every notion of superiority, religious elitism, and sanctimonious pretense. It slams against the ego of those who think they've already arrived. The Pharisees, the self-righteous, the ones who cling to their ivory towers and forget the power of the dirt from which they were made. This isn't about Jesus sitting down with society's rejects just to make a point. It's about him choosing to sit with the broken, the lost, the ones aware of their flaws, because they're the only ones ready to listen. Real talk, he didn't come for the healthy. He came for the sick, the forsaken, the overlooked. Those who know they're in trouble, not those pretending they have it all figured out. You see, here's the thing. The Pharisees, the supposed gatekeepers of righteousness, they couldn't wrap their heads around this. They looked at Jesus dining with tax collectors, thieves, and sinners. And what did they do? They whispered like cowards behind his back, wondering why a man who claimed to be holy would lower himself to such company. "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" they asked. But really, that question exposed everything. Their arrogance, their ignorance, their fragility. People who operate out of pride hate seeing others who thrive outside their system. Why? Because it threatens their status. They need you to need them. They need you to come, groveling for forgiveness, to prove they're the gatekeepers of divine favor. So when Christ said, "I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices," he shattered their system of control. Understand this, people who feel threatened by your independence will always find a way to criticize your freedom. They want you confined within the rules they benefit from, the systems they enforce. Christ wasn't here to play by their rules. He was here to break them, and they hated him for it. Jesus looks for those who are ready to acknowledge one simple truth: I am not okay. But do you know how many people can't even say that? How many would rather die in denial than admit they're broken? That's why he chooses to sit with sinners, the ones who can say, "I messed up and I need help." You can't fix what you refuse to see as broken. Christ knew that the Pharisees, despite their polished appearances, were spiritually decayed inside. He didn't waste time with those who put on airs of perfection because they didn't have the humility to ask for healing. A nation is only as strong as its weakest link, and a person is only as powerful as their most neglected wound. You want to grow? Acknowledge where you're sick, where you're weak. Start there. That's where the real work begins. I hear a lot of people talk about growth, about healing. They say they want it, but most don't realize that healing isn't a pretty process. It's ugly, it's painful, it's raw. You're going to bleed before you become whole. In Matthew's house, Jesus sat with the broken and the damned, not because he enjoyed slumming it, but because he was doing the necessary work of healing, and healing demands honesty. Those people, those so-called sinners, had hit rock bottom. They had nothing left but their truth, and in that moment of truth, they became open vessels, ready to receive real power. But let me tell you, most people run from that kind of rawness. They're too afraid to confront what's festering inside them. The Pharisees, they would never lower themselves to admit their sickness. They preferred their pretty lies over the ugly truth. But remember this, Christ isn't for the ones who think they're healthy. He's for the ones who know they're sick and want to do something about it. Here's a hard truth. People avoid growth because growth exposes their lies. If you want to level up, You have to first come face to face with your own failures, your own flaws. That means ripping off every bandage, every mask, and staring at the mess you've made of your life. Most people aren't ready for that. They'd rather pretend they're good. They'd rather point fingers at the sinners in the room and say, "At least I'm not them." But you know what that is? It's fear. They're terrified that the spotlight might swing back their way, illuminating the cracks in their foundation. In Matthew 9:12, Jesus says, "Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do." He was exposing the Pharisees' greatest fear, that they were just as sick as the people they condemned, but too proud to admit it. And that's what keeps most people stuck. This need to appear better than they are. This fear of being exposed. But here's the kicker. Until you admit your sickness, you'll never be healed. There's a lot of talk about unity these days. We need to come together, they shout. Collective progress. But here's the thing. A group of lames is still a group of lames. Unity without strength is just collective weakness. It's the blind leading the blind. If you don't know how to stand on your own, what good are you to the collective? You've got to learn how to operate solo before you can bring anything valuable to the group. Stop thinking that just because you're part of something larger, that makes you strong. It doesn't. One broken link will still collapse an entire chain. If you can't handle being alone, if you can't learn to sharpen yourself in isolation, then you'll always be the weakest link. You want to change the world? Start by changing yourself. You think Jesus was rolling with a squad of perfect men? He took a bunch of misfits and taught them how to become self-sufficient first, then unified them around a greater purpose. But that unity came after individual transformation, not before. You know what your real problem is? You're afraid to be alone with yourself. You spend your life avoiding silence because you're terrified of what you might hear. You're scared of your own thoughts, your own truth. That's why you cling to the crowd, the collective noise, the distractions. As long as you're surrounded by people, you don't have to face yourself. But here's the catch. Growth happens in the quiet. Mastery happens when you're alone, doing the work, refining yourself. If you can't face yourself, how will you ever face the world? You have to stop running from solitude. In fact, you should crave it. That's where you'll find your edge. That's where you'll discover what you're truly made of. It's not in the crowd. It's in those moments when it's just you and your reflection. Here's the punchline. Christ didn't come for those who think they're strong. He came for those who know they're weak. Why? Because weakness, when acknowledged, is the first step to power. When you can admit, "I'm not where I need to be," you're positioning yourself for growth. You're opening yourself up to change, to evolution. That's where the demigod code kicks in. You learn your weaknesses, you refine your strengths, and you become unstoppable. You see, the Pharisees weren't powerful. They were weak. Weak because they couldn't admit their own flaws. Weak because they needed to stand on the backs of others to feel tall. But power doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from dominating yourself. There's a time for unity, sure, but there's also a time for individualism. Don't get it twisted. You need both. The problem with most people is they lean too heavily on one and neglect the other. You can't be unified if you're bringing weakness to the table. Unity isn't about leaning on the collective for strength. It's about individuals coming together after they've already mastered themselves. If you can't stand alone, what good are you in the group? Don't let the noise fool you. Before Jesus unified his disciples, he called each one individually. He didn't ask them to come as a group. He called Matthew while he was sitting alone at his tax booth. One man at a time. Master your solitude, then come to the table of unity with something real to offer. The Pharisees wanted sacrifice. They wanted you to crawl to them on your knees, begging for forgiveness. Jesus said, "No, I want mercy. I want you to see yourself for what you really are. No groveling, no begging. Just the raw, honest truth about who you are and what you need to fix. You want to be better? Then stop seeking comfort in rituals and rules. Start seeking mastery. Mercy isn't a free pass to stay broken. It's an opportunity to rise, to grow, to evolve." Christ knew that. The Pharisees didn't. The real question is, do you? Jesus wasn't dining with the righteous. He was dining with those willing to admit they needed help. This is the demigod code. Acknowledge your flaws, refine yourself, and come back stronger. Christ didn't come to babysit the deluded. He came to elevate those who knew they were sick. He didn't want sacrifices. He wanted warriors. And to become a warrior, you first have to face the battle within yourself. The world isn't going to hand you power. You've got to take it, and that starts by eating at the table of truth. And always remember that we are warriors. We are champions. We are gods.